What do you do when the person you love treats you like a stray dog they rescued for the aesthetic? And then one day they decide you're not cute anymore? Because that's the specific flavor of humiliation that Mantan Suami sung Juru Selamat is serving in 2026. And I'm not gonna lie, it grabbed me by the collar faster than I expected. Welcome back to Flick Flair, where I willingly stress myself out with fictional families who think respect is optional if you're married into the wrong last name. If you enjoy this kind of deep dive drama talk, hit subscribe, no pressure. Just come hang out when the next mess drops. And spoiler-wise, I'm gonna keep it mostly moderate. I'll talk about the setup and the kind of turns the story promises, but I'm not here to surgically reveal every late-game detail beyond what the premise already hands us. So the core of this story is simple, sharp, and kind of mean in the way the best revenge setups are. Sayan lives for 3 years as a son-in-law who is looked down on, like, not mildly disapproved of, but actively treated as lesser because he's keeping a promise. 3 years of swallowing pride, playing small, taking the side eye, the dismissive tone, the casual cruelty that people excuse as just family dynamics. And then his wife kicks him out. Not a mutual breakup, not a tragic misunderstanding. She literally casts him out. And that's when the protective bubble he's been holding over them? Gone. He pulls it back, reveals the truth publicly, and the ex-wife's family is left regretting it when it's already too late to undo what they did. Now here's why that premise works. It's not just about a man getting revenge. It's about the terrifying power of endurance. The drama is basically asking, how much disrespect can someone metabolize before it changes who they are? And I found myself watching Sayan like I was watching a kettle that has been politely simmering for way too long. You know it's gonna whistle. You just don't know how loud. And I love that the show doesn't even pretend that 3 years of being demeaned is character building. It's character altering. That matters. Too many dramas treat humiliation like a workout montage. Here, the setup, at least from what the storyline promises, is that Sayan isn't staying because he's weak. He's staying because he's committed. And that is a way more complicated, way more dangerous kind of strength. If you've ever been the easy target in a room, like the person everyone jokes about because they assume you won't bite back, this one hits a nerve. I'm not even being dramatic. There's something so intimate about prolonged disrespect. It's not one slap. It's drip, drip, drip. It's people speaking over you. It's the way they don't look up when you enter. It's being treated like your presence is a debt they're forced to pay. And 3 years of that? The show is basically daring you to ask, why didn't he leave earlier? And then it answers, because leaving would break the promise. And that promise is the last clean thing he thinks he has. Let me rewind to what I think is the emotional engine here. And it's not the public truth reveal, even though that's the flashy hook. The engine is the Menentu Yang Deepandang Renda part, the low-status son-in-law dynamic, this class and pride cage match happening in living rooms and family gatherings. The cruelty in those spaces is rarely loud. It's polite. It's concerned. It's passive-aggressive little comments that are technically harmless, but spiritually violent. A good director shoots that kind of cruelty like a slow suffocation. Tight frames, long pauses, reaction shots where the insult lands and everyone just lets it. And if the show nails that, it becomes addictive because the tension isn't will the villain twirl their mustache. It's how long until Sayan's face stops being neutral. Here's a question that kept tugging at me while watching. Is Sayan's patience a virtue? Or is it a self-inflicted punishment dressed up as honor? Because those are not the same thing, and the drama plays right in that grey zone. Pacing-wise, the 3-year stretch could easily become repetitive if the writing treats it like a treadmill. Insult, swallow it, sad music, repeat. But when this kind of plot really works, it's because each insult changes the relationship geometry. Every scene is a tiny negotiation of power. Who stands and who sits, who gets served first, who is asked questions, and who is spoken about like they're not in the room. If Mantan Suami sung Juru Selamat uses those micro shifts, the slow part won't feel slow. It'll feel like pressure building with purpose. And I'll be honest, I have a mixed but intrigued stance going in, because these hidden protector reveals truth publicly dramas can be either deliciously cathartic or absolutely ridiculous. Sometimes the show wants you to believe one man can basically single-handedly keep an entire family afloat, like he's a human insurance policy. If the writing doesn't ground what protection means, financial, social, legal, reputation, it can turn into that vague superpower thing where the hero is powerful purely because the plot says so. The storyline here wisely keeps it broad in summary, which means the actual execution is going to make or break it. But even with that risk, the emotional logic is solid. They only value him when his value is removed. That's human, unfortunately. That's real. People don't always understand what you do for them. They just get used to it. And then when you stop, they don't feel guilty at first. They feel inconvenienced. That's when the regret comes later. That's when the too late part bites. There's also something juicy about the title energy. Mantan Suami Sang Juru Selamat doesn't just say ex-husband. It says ex-husband of the savior. That's a loaded phrase. It positions Sayan like a figure who's been performing salvation quietly, maybe saving them from consequences, saving them from themselves, and then being treated like he's disposable. The irony is built in. The show is basically whispering, you thought he was nothing? He was the reason you were okay. Let's talk about Sayan as a character, because he lives or dies on performance. This is the kind of role where overacting ruins everything. If he plays sad too loudly, he becomes a martyr. If he plays cold too early, the 3-year promise feels fake. You need that layered restraint, the polite smile that arrives half a second late, the jaw tightening that only shows when someone turns away, the way his eyes track the room like he's counting exits, not because he's scared, but because he's managing himself. The best actors can communicate, I am enduring, without begging you to applaud the endurance. And here's where I'll give a respectful contrarian take, because I already know what some viewers are going to say. People are going to roast the why did he stay 3 years element as unrealistic or spineless. But I actually think that's the point, and it could be the most emotionally honest part of the entire setup. Not everyone leaves when they're mistreated. People stay for promises. People stay because of shame. People stay because they want to prove they can survive it. People stay because leaving feels like confirming every insult they've been fed. That's not weak writing. That's human psychology, and it's ugly. And that's why it works. Now, the wife. We don't have a name in the details we're working with, so I'm not going to pretend I know her full backstory. But the fact that she's the one who expels him matters. It's not the mother-in-law or the patriarch. It's the person who, theoretically, is supposed to be his safe place inside that hostile family structure. That's betrayal with teeth. When your spouse chooses the family's contempt over your dignity, it doesn't just end a marriage. It rewires your definition of love. And I need the show to let that betrayal breathe. Not just as a plot button that triggers the revenge arc, but as grief. Because being kicked out by your partner isn't only anger. It's humiliation plus heartbreak plus the sick realization that you were alone the whole time. Let me paint the kind of mini-scene this drama thrives on. Because even without specific episode events, the vibe is crystal clear. Imagine a quiet house at night, too clean, too cold, the kind of lighting that makes skin look slightly pale. Sayan stands near the doorway, not even fully inside the room, while his wife delivers the final line that pushes him out. No shouting. That's what makes it worse. Her voice is controlled, maybe even tired, like she's discussing logistics. Somewhere in the background, you can hear something normal. An air conditioner hum, a clock ticking, a distant car. And Sayan doesn't explode. He doesn't plead. He just looks at her like he's trying to find the person he married, and he can't. He nods once. He takes a breath that you can almost feel in your own chest. And then he steps backward, crossing a threshold that feels like a funeral. That's the moment I want the camera to linger on the door frame. The line between I belong here and I never did. A good director will hold that shot long enough to make you uncomfortable, because discomfort is the currency of this story. And then, this is where the editing rhythm becomes everything. The show shifts. When Cyan removes his protection, the pace should tighten. The music should change shape. Less mournful strings, more clean, deliberate beats. Or even better, silence. Let the consequences make the sound. Let the family's panic be the score. That's how you make the power shift feel real. I'm also watching for how they handle the public truth reveal. Because revealing the truth in front of the public can be corny if it's staged like a superhero unmasking. But if it's played as exhausted necessity, like Cyan doesn't even want to do this, but they forced his hand, it can hit like a truck. The best version is not triumphant. It's surgical. It's, I tried being kind. You used it. Now you get reality. Here's the tricky part. Though, public humiliation as justice is a dangerous fantasy. It's cathartic to watch, but it's morally messy. And that mess is where the drama can become more than just a revenge snack. If the show lets you feel both the satisfaction and the discomfort, if it lets you enjoy the downfall while also asking what this does to Cyan's soul, then it has teeth. Because think about it. A man who survives 3 years of disrespect by clinging to a promise. What happens when he finally breaks the silence? Does he become free? Or does he become someone who only feels alive when he's punishing people who hurt him? That's the emotional cliff this story is standing on. And I'll confess something personal here. I have a low tolerance for noble suffering arcs where the hero is basically a saint who never cracks, never does anything petty, never has an ugly thought. That's not relatable to me. If you treat me like dirt for 3 years, I'm not emerging as a luminous being of pure forgiveness. I'm emerging as a person with complicated feelings and probably a few unflattering impulses. So I'm hoping Cyan's arc isn't just endure, then win. I want endure, then reckon. Also, small aside, because I can't not say it, any family that looks down on a son-in-law for 3 years and then acts shocked when he stops helping them is the kind of audacity that should come with a warning label. Like, you don't get to be cruel and dependent at the same time. Pick a struggle. Visually, these dramas tend to fall into two palettes. Either glossy rich, where the family's home is shot like a luxury ad, or grey and sterile, where wealth looks like emotional emptiness. I don't know which way the actual production leans, but I'm rooting for contrast. Give me warm light around the family when they feel comfortable being cruel, and colder light around Cyan as he isolates himself. Then, when he reclaims power, flip it. Suddenly he's shot with clean clarity, center frame, steady camera. While the family is captured with shakier movement, busier blocking, more visual noise. That's not just pretty filmmaking, that's storytelling through lenses. And sound design matters more here than people admit. The most painful scenes in a humiliation drama are not the ones with loud music. They're the ones where the room goes quiet after a cutting remark, and you hear a spoon tap a ball, or a chair scrape the floor, and nobody says, "Hey, that was too far." That silence is complicity. If the show is smart, it'll weaponize everyday sounds to make you feel how ordinary cruelty becomes. Now, character dynamics. The ex-wife's family. Again, no specifics given. So I'm sticking to what the premise guarantees, functions like a social machine. They devalue him as a unit. That's important, because it means Cyan isn't fighting one villain. He's fighting a shared worldview. Status is worth more than integrity. Appearances matter more than gratitude. And the worst part? That worldview often comes with a smile. So when he reveals the truth publicly, the regret they feel isn't automatically moral awakening. Sometimes regret is just fear. Sometimes it's, oh no, we misjudged a powerful person. Not, oh no, we mistreated a human being. And I really want the drama to tease that apart. If it does, it becomes more than fantasy revenge. It becomes a critique of class cruelty. Here's another thing I appreciated in the premise. Science protection being removed implies he was actively holding back consequences. That means he wasn't just passively enduring, he was quietly managing fallout behind the scenes. That's a very specific kind of love, protecting people who don't deserve it. And yes, it can be enabling. But it's also psychologically believable. Sometimes the people who get treated the worst are the ones doing the most unseen labor. And doesn't that mirror real life a little too neatly? The person everyone dismisses is often the person doing the emotional admin, the practical fixes, the invisible maintenance that keeps the whole messy structure upright. The drama is basically turning that into a ticking bomb. Okay, but let's address the elephant. Stories like this can accidentally glorify humiliation, like they're saying, just tolerate abuse long enough, and you'll be rewarded with a satisfying comeback. And that's not a message I love. So the writing has to be careful. The promise that keeps Cyan there for 3 years, whatever it is, needs to feel like a real moral bind, not just an excuse to extend suffering for entertainment. If the drama treats his endurance as romantic, that's gross. If it treats it as tragic, complicated, and costly, then we're in business. And while we're at it, I need the ex-wife to be written as more than a cardboard villain. She can be wrong. She can be cruel. But I want the show to understand that people don't become that way in a vacuum. Is she pressured by the family? Is she invested in status? Is she scared of losing comfort? Is she someone who confuses love with image management? There are so many possibilities that can make her feel like a person, not just a plot lever. Because if she's just evil wife who kicks him out, then the story becomes a straight line. But if she's layered, if she's someone who maybe loved him once and then chose cowardice repeatedly, that's when the heartbreak lands. That's when the divorce isn't just a trigger, it's a tragedy. And if you're still with me, here's the part I'm dying to dig into. The exact flavor of Cyan's public reveal. Not the details, those aren't in the summary, but the emotional posture. Is it rage? Is it calm? Is it sorrow? Does he enjoy it? Does he hate that it's come to this? Because the difference between vengeful power fantasy and character-driven reckoning lies in his eyes in that moment. I can already imagine 2 versions of the same scene. Version 1. Dramatic music swells, everyone gasps. Cyan smirks, the family falls to their knees metaphorically. Fun, but shallow. Version 2. The room is bright, almost sterile, like a courtroom or a press space. Cyan speaks without raising his voice. The camera doesn't rush. It just watches faces realize, one by one, that the story they told themselves about him was a lie. And instead of a smirk, Cyan looks tired. Like he's finally putting down a burden he carried for people who never deserved the weight. That's the version that would stick with me. And here's a question that sneaks up on you. When he removes protection, is that justice? Or abandonment? Because if he was shielding them from consequences they earned, then removing it is fair. But if he was shielding them from consequences that could harm innocent people around them, then it gets complicated. The drama can do a lot with that tension if it chooses to. Performance-wise, I'm also watching the family actors, because in these stories, the antagonistic family can become cartoonishly nasty, like they wake up every morning and choose violence for sport. The best performances don't do that. They play cruelty as entitlement. Like they genuinely believe they're correct. Like they're not being mean, they're putting someone in their place. That self-justification is what makes them believable and infuriating. The camera can help sell it too. If the family is often shot from slightly lower angles when they're in control, they'll feel imposing. If Cyan is framed with more negative space around him, wide shots where he's small in a big room, that visual loneliness will do half the acting for him. And when the power flips, the show can literally flip the grammar. Suddenly Cyan gets the centered close-ups, the steadier lens, the warmer tone, while the family is caught in harsher light, fragmented by door frames and reflections. Let me just say it, I'm a sucker for a drama that understands doorways. Doorways are emotional. If you keep staging Sion near thresholds, huff in, huff out, you're telling the story of someone who never fully belonged. And when he finally steps through a doorway and doesn't look back, that's cinema. That's not just plot. Another thing the premise implies, and I hope the show leans into, is the idea of protection as identity. If Sion's whole role for 3 years was the one who keeps things stable, then removing that role is not just a strategic move. It's a personal crisis. Who is he if he's not saving them? Does he even know what he wants outside of duty? That's the kind of internal conflict that can elevate the story beyond revenge. And it's also where the show can get quietly sad. Because if you build your life around fulfilling a promise, the moment you finish it, or the moment it's broken for you, you can feel hollow. Relief and emptiness can show up in the same breath. A good actor can play that with one exhale. Okay, here's the pivot that makes or breaks my trust. The family's regret. Menyasal ter lambat, regret too late, is a line that can be either deeply satisfying or emotionally cheap. If they regret it because they finally recognize his humanity, then it's a moral story. If they regret it because they lost benefits, then it's a social satire. Both can work. But if the drama tries to pretend the second is the first, if it frames selfish panic as heartfelt remorse, then it's manipulating you. And I'm not allergic to manipulation, by the way. I watch dramas. I consent to being emotionally played. I just want the show to be honest about what it's doing. Also, I have to talk about the promise. The storyline makes it the central justification for Sion's endurance, but it doesn't spell it out. That's fine, mystery is part of the hook. But the writing will need to make that promise feel weighty enough that 3 years doesn't read like pure self-sabotage. The promise has to be specific emotionally, even if it's not immediately specific in plot. It has to feel like it came from a moment of real vulnerability, like something that would haunt you if you broke it. And has a spicy little thought. Sometimes promises are cages we build to avoid making a new choice. If Sion's promise becomes a way to delay confronting his marriage's rot, that's fascinating. It means he wasn't just loyal, he was afraid to admit he chose wrong. I don't know if the drama goes there, but if it does, I'll respect it. Now, since we're talking to newcomers, and not assuming you've inhaled every trope in this genre, let me contextualize the appeal. The reason these humiliated spouse reveals truth stories pop off is because they play with a universal fantasy, being underestimated until the moment you decide you're done. Everyone has had a moment where they wished they could flip the table with receipts. The drama gives you that, but stretched over a long emotional runway, so the payoff feels earned. But earned payoffs require discipline. If the show rushes the expulsion and then sprints to the public reveal, it'll feel like it skipped the emotional invoice. You need to feel those 3 years in your bones, even if the drama doesn't literally show every month. You need the sense of accumulation, the quiet compromises, the nights where Sion stared at a ceiling and convinced himself tomorrow would be different. And this is where montage can be powerful, if they use it. Not the cheesy kind with obvious sad music, but the kind where you watch routines repeat with small degradations. A family dinner where he's always last. A corridor where people brush past him. A living room where his presence is tolerated, not welcomed. Repetition is the point, because disrespect is repetitive. So when the expulsion happens, it shouldn't feel like a random spike. It should feel like the last straw that was always coming. Let's talk about chemistry too, because the marriage is the emotional battleground. Even if the wife is mostly antagonistic, the actors need some kind of believable history, something in their body language that says, "We once chose each other," even if that choice has been buried. The tragedy of these stories lands hardest when you can glimpse what could have been. A soft moment that gets interrupted. A look that almost turns into concern and then hardens into pride. That kind of microacting is everything. And honestly, the most heartbreaking version of this plot is not she never loved him. It's she loved him and still did this. That's the kind of betrayal that makes you reevaluate every memory. Here's another rehook, because I can feel the story tightening. When Cyan finally reveals the truth publicly, is he doing it to destroy them or to finally be seen? Because those are different motivations, and they lead to different kinds of aftermath. A lot of dramas confuse power with validation. They think if the hero becomes powerful, the pain is automatically healed. But anyone who's been demeaned long-term knows the wound isn't just material. It's the feeling of being erased. So if the public reveal is framed as now the world knows who I am, it can be triumphant, sure. But it can also be sad, because why did it take public recognition for basic respect? That's a theme I hope the show doesn't dodge. Dignity shouldn't be conditional on status. And since this is flick flair, I'm gonna nitpick craft a little more, because I know some of you love that. Editing rhythm can either make Cyan feel intelligent or make him feel like the plot is doing the work for him. If he suddenly wins because the editor cuts to shocked faces and dramatic music, that's not satisfying. But if the show plants subtle cause and effect, like you see him choosing silence strategically, you see him noticing things, you see him weighing consequences, then when he pulls protection, it feels like a decision, not a magic trick. Even the way they stage the public reveal matters. If he's elevated physically, on a stage, at a podium, even just standing while others sit, that's visual power. If he's at ground level, eye to eye, and still dominates through calmness, that's character power. I'm partial to the second because it feels more adult. But the show could go either way depending on tone. Also, I want to shout out a thing that sounds small but isn't. Wardrobe storytelling. If Cyan spends 3 years dressing in muted colors, blending in, looking appropriate, and then later starts wearing sharper silhouettes, clearer tones, more intentional choices, that's not vanity. That's identity returning. Clothes in these dramas are emotional armor. And if the family dresses in pristine, expensive clothes while behaving ugly, that contrast is delicious. Wealthy aesthetics with poor character. Give it to me. Now, let's be real. The premise promises a certain kind of satisfaction. The family regrets too late. That implies consequences. It implies their social standing or internal stability takes a hit. And while I can't claim specific plot beats, the emotional arc is basically a slingshot. You pull Cyan back for 3 years, then release. The release needs to feel like a snap, not a gentle glide. But I also don't want it to become pure demolition porn. The best revenge stories aren't just about watching bad people lose. They're about watching the hero choose what kind of person they're going to be after suffering. If Cyan becomes cruel in the same way the family was cruel, that's one story. If he becomes cold but principled, that's another. If he becomes compassionate but firm, able to withdraw without humiliating, then that's surprisingly mature and, frankly, rarer. And yes, I'm aware I'm asking for nuance from a drama whose title basically screams ex-husband savior reveal. Let me dream. There's another uncomfortable theme baked in here: transactional love. Cyan is treated as low status, which means the family likely sees marriage as a ladder, not a bond. The wife expelling him is the ultimate transaction reversal. You're no longer profitable to my image, so you're out. That's why the public truth reveal hurts them. It interrupts the transaction with reality. Suddenly their value system is exposed, and they can't buy their way out of the narrative. And if the show is brave, it'll also ask, did Cyan participate in that transaction in some way? Did he marry in for reasons that weren't purely love? Even if he did it for a promise, was that promise tied to obligation, debt, gratitude? Those are still forms of transaction, just wrapped in morality. I'm really curious whether the drama frames Cyan as a savior who rescues out of love, or a savior who rescues because he needs to feel needed. That second version is messier, more psychologically sharp, and it would make the 3-year endurance feel less like sainthood and more like compulsion. And that would also make the moment he stops protecting them feel like withdrawal. Like an addict deciding to get clean. You don't just stop enabling overnight without shaking. Speaking of shaking, Sound choices again. If, at the moment he removes protection, the show cuts the music entirely and lets you hear his breathing, that would be such a smart move. Make it physical. Make it visceral. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes power is simply no longer flinching. I also want to highlight the in front of the public aspect because it changes the emotional temperature. Private confrontations are about intimacy. Public ones are about narrative control. When Sayan reveals truth publicly, he's not just addressing the family. He's addressing the story the family told others about him. He's taking the pen back. And that's why these scenes can be so satisfying, because humiliation is often social. It's not just what's done to you, it's what people are allowed to believe about you. Correcting the record is a kind of self-rescue. But here's the risk. Public truth reveals can accidentally turn the hero into a performer. Like, is he doing justice? Or is he putting on a show because he finally has the stage? Again, morally messy. Again, potentially great. I can already hear some of you saying, okay, but is it fun? And yes, it can be fun in that deliciously stressful way where you're half angry and half thrilled. The fun comes from anticipation. Every time Sayan is disrespected, you're storing it up like ammunition. The show is basically building a warehouse of receipts, and you're waiting for the doors to open. But fun isn't enough. I want the emotional aftermath. After the public reveal, after the family regret, after the protection is gone, what does Sayan do with the quiet? Who is he when he's not reacting? That, to me, is where the drama proves if it has staying power, or if it's just a viral premise stretched thin. And I'm not done with the wife yet, because she's the most dangerous variable. If the show tries to redeem her too quickly with a last minute she had reasons, that can feel like betrayal of the emotional contract. But if it refuses to explore her interiority at all, she becomes a scapegoat so the family can take all the blame. The sweet spot is letting her be responsible while still being human. Let her make choices. Let her live with them. Let regret be complicated, not cleansing. There's a specific kind of regret I hope the show captures. Not the dramatic sobbing apology, but the quiet moment where someone realizes they can't rewind time. Where they reach for the old dynamic, where Sayan would quietly fix things, and he doesn't. And the room suddenly feels colder, because the person they took for granted is no longer cushioning the fall. And Sayan, in that moment, shouldn't look smug. He should look like someone watching a fire he tried to prevent for years. Not pleased. Just done. I also think the promise angle invites a spiritual reading. Promises are vows. Vows are sacred to some people, even when they're self-destructive. If Sayan's identity is built around being someone who keeps vows, then breaking the protection isn't just revenge, it's a rupture in his self-concept. He's choosing himself over the vow. That's growth, but it can also feel like grief. Okay, one more small thing that made me weirdly emotional. The phrase, Menentu yang di pandang renda. There's a particular loneliness to being an in-law. You're inside, but not really. You don't have the same childhood history. You don't have the same unspoken permissions. And if your spouse doesn't defend you, you're basically a guest who can be criticized like family, but loved like a stranger. That's a brutal position. Seeing a drama center that dynamic, especially with a male character, since these stories often put women in that role, feels like it could tap into a fresh angle if handled thoughtfully. And yes, it also scratches that universal itch of wanting someone to finally say, actually, you were wrong about me, with proof. So where am I at, emotionally, by this point in the story setup? I'm invested in Sayan's dignity. I'm wary of the show turning him into a flawless avenger. I'm hoping the family's regret isn't treated as redemption by default. And I'm watching the craft choices, music, framing, pacing, to see if the drama understands that humiliation isn't an event, it's an atmosphere. Because if they get the atmosphere right, the public truth reveal won't even need fireworks. It'll feel inevitable. And the next thing I want to talk about, because it's the real litmus test, is how the drama frames truth. Is truth presented as a weapon, a relief, or a responsibility? Because depending on that choice, science transformation can read as empowerment, or it can read as corrosion. And if you think I'm overthinking it, just wait until we dig into what removing protection actually symbolizes in a relationship where love got tangled up with obligation. Because there's a version of this story where Sion isn't just punishing them, he's finally letting them experience the world without his quiet sacrifice. And that is a very different kind of justice, the kind that looks calm on the outside but feels like a storm underneath. Especially when the people who used to dismiss him start realizing that nobody they mock was the one holding the whole structure together. And the realization doesn't arrive as a single dramatic epiphany, but as a sequence of small failures, missed rescues, unanswered calls, doors that don't open anymore, and the terrifying understanding that the safety net they assumed was permanent was actually a person who could walk away at any time and did. And did. And what I love about that particular kind of collapse is that it doesn't need the story to invent some giant soap opera catastrophe to make the point. It can be as simple as the family suddenly having to face consequences they used to outsource. Not in a superhero way, but in a wait, why isn't this getting smoothed over like it always does? Way. That's where the panic becomes believable, because it's not theatrical panic. It's logistical panic. It's social panic. It's the dawning horror of realizing you've been living on borrowed stability. The drama's biggest advantage is that it's operating on a universal truth. People will rationalize cruelty until it costs them something. And then they'll call it regret, like regret magically scrubs away the fact that they enjoyed the power imbalance while it benefited them. That's harsh, but it's also the only framing that makes Meniusel Ter Lambert hit. If their regret is too pretty, it's not regret. It's reputation management. And I'm gonna be real with you, this is the kind of story where I don't even need the family to grovel. Groveling can be satisfying for about 30 seconds, and then it gets embarrassing. What I need is for them to be forced to sit in the emotional bill they ran up. I want the discomfort of watching people who were so sure of their superiority suddenly realize they built their confidence on a misunderstanding. Because that's the humiliation reversal that actually matters. Not, I'm powerful and you're not. It's, you were wrong and you were loud about it. If you're wondering how to keep a premise like this from going stale, it comes down to escalation with meaning. The 3-year endurance period shouldn't just be more insults. It should be deeper cuts. A good script knows the hierarchy of pain. Early slides are public rudeness. Mid-level pain is being excluded from decisions. Deep pain is betrayal by your spouse. And then the deepest pain, honestly, is the realization that you were never considered family in the first place, just tolerated. That's why the expulsion is so potent. It's not just losing a home. It's being officially categorized as disposable. Here's the thing that some writers get wrong. They think the revenge is the climax. But in a character-driven version of this story, the climax is the choice. The choice to stop saving them. The choice to stop being the cushion. And if the drama lets that choice be complicated, if it shows that Sion doesn't feel pure joy about it, then it becomes something more adult than a simple gotcha. So let's talk about Sion removing protection like it's not a plot device, but a personality pivot. When you protect people who disrespect you, you're often protecting an image of yourself too. The reliable one, the patient one, the one who never makes a scene. And when you stop, you're not only changing their lives, you're changing the role you play in your own head. That can feel like grief. It can feel like guilt. It can feel like freedom. Sometimes it feels like all three in the same hour. And this is where I'm hoping the performance doesn't turn Sion into a smug chess master. Because the most honest version of this man isn't smug. It's exhausted. It's, I begged the world to let me be soft, and it punished me for it. So now I'm going to be hard, because that's the only language you respect. That's not a victory lap. That's a tragedy with a spine. Okay, wait. Let's pause on a detail that's easy to gloss over, but actually changes everything. He lived as a Menentu who was looked down on Demi Menepti Janji to keep a promise. That means the endurance is purposeful. It's not random suffering. So the writing has to treat the promise like an engine, not a decoration. Even if the show delays revealing what the promise is, it needs to show us what the promise does to him, how it shapes his daily choices, how it keeps him from defending himself, how it makes him accept disrespect as payment for something he feels he owes. Because if the promise is just a vague excuse, then the whole structure wobbles. And here's a rehook for you. What if the promise isn't noble at all? What if it's complicated or even misguided? Because that would make the story way more interesting than he's just a saint. I've seen a lot of viewers, especially newcomers to this kind of melodrama, get impatient with endurance arcs. And I get it. Sometimes you're watching like, "Sir, stand up. Please." But endurance arcs can be some of the most psychologically accurate storytelling out there when done right. Because people don't always leave the first time they're disrespected. They don't always fight back the first time they're minimized. They try to earn love. They try to fix perception. They think if they just behave correctly, they'll be accepted. That's a heartbreaking lie. And stories like this are basically about breaking that lie. That's why the wife's role is so sensitive. She's the one person in that house who could have changed the entire dynamic by simply choosing him consistently. And she didn't. The expulsion makes that failure undeniable. It's the moment she stops being someone who's in a difficult situation and becomes someone who made an active choice. And I'm not saying the show needs to turn her into a monster. Monsters are boring. What I want is for her to be recognizable. To look like the kind of person who rationalizes compromise until it becomes cruelty. The kind of person who thinks neutrality is harmless. The kind of person who says, "I'm just trying to keep peace," while quietly sacrificing someone else's dignity to do it. There's a particular kind of acting that sells that, avoiding eye contact when it matters, swallowing words you should say out loud, letting your face soften for a microsecond, and then tightening it because you remember your role. If the actress or actor, depending on casting, plays those micro flickers, you'll hate her choices while still understanding she's human. And that's the sweet spot for drama hate watching, anger plus recognition. And yes, I said hate watching. Sometimes this genre is basically controlled rage with a soundtrack. Now, about the public reveal. Because the premise tells us Cyan exposes the truth, the husband public, in front of the public. And that's where the story becomes a commentary on status and narrative. The family's power likely lies in perception. If they're a family that looks down on an in-law, they care about hierarchy, which usually means they care about what people think. So a public truth is not just a truth. It's a social weapon. But the show has to be careful not to make the public feel like a magic courtroom where everyone instantly believes Cyan and the villains instantly collapse. Realistically, public perception is messy. Even in melodrama logic, it should feel like a risk. He's putting himself out there too. He's stepping out of silence. He's inviting scrutiny. That's brave. It's also dangerous. And if the drama lets us feel that danger, if Cyan's voice shakes slightly before he steadies it, if there's a moment where you think, "Oh God, what if this backfires?" then the scene earns its electricity. Let me give you another vivid mini-scene, a composite one that stays faithful to the premise without faking specifics. Picture a public space that's too bright, harsh overhead lights, the kind that make everyone look exposed. The sound is slightly echoey. There's a low murmur of people waiting for something. Cyan steps forward, not dramatically, but with that careful calm of someone who has already accepted the consequences. The camera doesn't rush to his face immediately. It stays wide for a beat, letting you see how alone he is in the frame, and then it slowly pushes in as he starts speaking. And here's the key. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't perform anger for the crowd. He just states what's true. And you watch the ex-wife's family in the background. Stiff posture, tight smiles, that brittle politeness people use when they're trying to control a situation. And then, one by one, the control cracks. Someone's throat bobs as they swallow. Someone's eyes dart like they're searching for an exit. Someone laughs too loudly at the wrong time, because panic makes people weird. And the music, if the sound team knows what they're doing, doesn't swell. It drops out. You hear the room. You hear the shift. The silence becomes an accusation. That's the kind of scene that makes you lean forward without realizing you moved. Now, here's a surprising take that I'm willing to defend. I don't actually want Cyan to win in a glamorous way. I want him to win in a quiet, irreversible way. I want the story to understand that the most painful consequence for a family like this isn't financial loss or public embarrassment. It's losing access, losing control, losing the ability to pull him back into the role they assigned him. Because once someone stops caring about your approval, your power over them evaporates. That's the real reversal. Not, I'm richer than you now. It's, you can't hurt me anymore because I no longer need you to see me. If the drama goes for that emotional victory rather than just external triumph, it'll land deeper. But I can already hear the counter-argument. We want the fireworks. And look, I get it. This is a revenge-flavored premise. It's supposed to scratch that itch. I'm not saying remove the satisfaction. I'm saying aim the satisfaction at the right target. Make the satisfaction about dignity restored, not cruelty returned. Because revenge stories get ugly fast if they confuse justice with humiliation. They can end up replicating the exact harm they're criticizing. And yes, sometimes that's the point too. Sometimes the story wants to show you how pain spreads. But if that's the direction, the show needs to be honest about it. Don't pretend it's empowerment if it's just another cycle of dehumanizing someone. Okay, pivoting slightly, pacing again. The middle stretch of a drama like this often struggles because the premise is a straight line. Endure, get expelled, reveal truth, family regrets. So the writers need internal pivots. They need to change the emotional flavor as you go. Endurance can't be one note. It has to evolve. Hopeful endurance, then numb endurance, then resentful endurance, then strategic endurance. And that evolution can be shown in tiny choices. Early Cyan might apologize too quickly. Later Cyan might simply stay silent. Early Cyan might try to prove himself. Later Cyan might stop trying to be liked and focus on being correct. Those shifts make the time feel lived in. If the show stays on one emotional setting for too long, it'll drag, because viewers can predict every beat. But if it modulates, if it surprises you with moments of warmth, moments of almost connection, moments where you think maybe the wife will defend him, and then she doesn't, it keeps you engaged in that painful, maybe this time, loop. And that loop is actually thematically relevant. People in unhealthy relationships often live in maybe this time. The drama can mirror that psychology. Here's a rehook that matters for fans of character work. What if Cyan's biggest conflict isn't the family, but the part of himself that still wants their approval? Because that's the ugly truth of being demeaned by people you try to belong to. You can leave physically and still be emotionally trapped. You can win socially and still hear their voices in your head. And if the drama acknowledges that, it becomes more than a fantasy. It becomes a healing story with sharp edges. Now, let's talk about craft in a way that critics will appreciate without turning this into a lecture. Camera language in family humiliation dramas often relies on blocking. Who stands where? Who gets the center? Who gets pushed to the edge of the frame? If Cyan is frequently placed behind furniture, partially obscured, or shot through reflections that can visually communicate how the family sees him, as background, as peripheral, as not fully real. And then when he reveals truth publicly, the camera can finally give him clean, uninterrupted close-ups, no obstruction, no visual apology. Editing can reinforce this too. Early scenes might cut away from Cyan's reaction quickly, denying him emotional space. Later scenes can linger on his face, letting the audience finally inhabit his perspective. That shift in viewpoint is powerful because it's not just telling you he's important now. It's making you feel what it means to be seen. Lighting is another sneaky storyteller. Soft warm light can feel like safety. Harsh cool light can feel like exposure. If the family home is lit warmly while Sion is treated coldly, that contrast becomes bitterly ironic. And if later the public truth reveal happens under harsh lights, it can symbolize the family's comfort being stripped away. No cozy shadows to hide in. Just accountability. Music, too. These dramas sometimes overscore the suffering. Sad piano, sad strings, sad everything. And listen, I'm not above being manipulated by a well-timed violin. But constant scoring can numb you. Silence is more dangerous. Diegetic sound, real sounds in the scene, makes humiliation feel real. A fork clinking, a phone buzzing and nobody answering, a door latch clicking. Those little sounds can be more brutal than a full orchestra. And on the flip side, when Sion reclaims power, I don't want heroic fanfare. Give him controlled, minimal music. Something steady. Something that feels like boundaries, not aggression. Because boundaries are the most mature form of revenge. Let's also address the family's role as a collective antagonist. A family unit can be scarier than a singular villain because it normalized the harm. One person being cruel is a problem. A room full of people being cruel is a culture. And if Sion endured for 3 years, he wasn't just enduring individuals, he was enduring a system. That's why the public truth matters. Systems hate daylight. Systems survive on private agreements and unspoken rules. Public truth forces people to answer for rules they thought were invisible. And that's where the show can say something about class, morality, and social performance. When the family looks down on him, they're not just insulting him. They're defending their own identity. They need him to be less than so they can be more than. If he's actually capable, honorable, or powerful, it destabilizes their self-image. So they resist that truth until it becomes impossible to deny. That's psychologically sharp. And if the actors lean into it, playing not just arrogance but fear, you'll get a richer villain dynamic. Because arrogance often covers insecurity. A family obsessed with status is usually terrified of losing it. Okay, I need to make a confession as a viewer. I get impatient with public humiliation scenes when they're written like everyone in the crowd is suddenly a jury chanting a shame. It's cheesy. It turns human beings into props. So I'm hoping the public in this drama feels textured. Like it includes skeptics, opportunists, people who whisper, people who record on phones, people who don't care, people who care too much. A believable public reaction makes the stakes feel real. And if the show wants to be extra smart, it can show that public sympathy is fickle. Sion might be celebrated for a moment and then questioned. That would force him to rely on himself rather than external validation. It would keep the story emotionally honest. Now, let's think about Sion's internal arc across this premise without inventing episode plots. The arc I'm hoping for goes something like this. He starts with duty, moves into disillusionment, hits a breaking point with expulsion, then chooses truth, and then has to confront what truth costs him. Because truth isn't free. Truth can burn bridges you secretly still wanted to cross. And there's a specific grief in realizing you protected people who never would have protected you. That grief can show up as rage, sure, but it can also show up as emptiness. A hollow space where your loyalty used to sit. The drama can show that with physicality. Maybe Sion's posture changes, shoulders slightly hunched early on, like he's bracing. Later, shoulders back, but not in a cocky way, more like he's reclaiming oxygen. He takes up space. He walks slower. He doesn't rush to appease. Those are acting choices that communicate boundaries more effectively than any monologue. And if we're talking performance notes, micro-expressions are everything. The little blink when someone says something cruel. The huff smile that's actually a defense mechanism. The way he might look down for a beat, collecting himself, then look up with a steadier gaze. That's the craft that makes you believe 3 years happened, even if the timeline is compressed. Here's another rehook, because we're about to hit a moral knot. When Sion exposes the truth publicly, is he protecting himself? Or Is he also protecting the public from the family's influence? Because truth isn't always just personal. Sometimes revealing truth is an ethical act. If the family's status allowed them to harm others, not just Sayan, then exposing them becomes larger than revenge. The show could hint at that without needing to specify details. Even a line of dialogue, general, not plot-specific, could frame Sayan's choice as "I'm done enabling." That would make him feel principled rather than petty. But if the show frames it purely as "you hurt me, so I'll ruin you," it becomes a darker story. Not necessarily bad. Dark can be compelling, but it changes the taste of the catharsis. You might cheer and still feel uneasy. And honestly, that uneasy cheer is sometimes the most interesting emotion a drama can give you. Now, the ex-wife's regret, if it comes, needs to be believable. And believable regret isn't a single crying scene. It's a series of realizations. It's her remembering moments she dismissed. It's her hearing someone else repeat an insult she once defended. And suddenly, it sounds uglier. It's her trying to call him and realizing she doesn't even know how to speak to him without demanding something. That's one of the saddest things about relationships built on power imbalance. When you finally try to speak sincerely, you don't have the language. You only have commands and complaints. Sincerity feels foreign. If the show captures that, it'll hurt in a good way. Now, I want to address a potential critique I can already see in comment sections. Isn't Sayan also responsible for letting this go on? And yes, kind of. But responsible is a slippery word. He made choices. He stayed. He didn't leave. He kept protecting. Those are actions. But they're actions made under psychological pressure, obligation, and whatever this promise entails. The drama's job is to show that complexity without blaming the victim of mistreatment. It's possible to say, "You should have left earlier," and also acknowledge, "It's hard to leave when you're bound by loyalty and hope." Both can be true. And a good drama doesn't flatten that into a moral lesson. It lets you sit in the contradiction. In fact, some of the best scenes in stories like this are when the hero almost breaks. Not the big dramatic break, but the tiny almost break, where you see the words on his tongue, the anger in his eyes, and then he swallows it because he remembers the promise. That swallowing is the tragedy. That's the moment the audience feels, "Oh, he's trapped." And it's also the moment you start wanting his freedom more than his revenge. Okay, visual motive talk, because I can't help myself. Mirrors. This drama could use mirrors so well. The family sees themselves as high status. They love reflections, literal and metaphorical. If Sayan is often shown in reflections early on, but distorted or fragmented, it can symbolize how he's been forced to see himself through their eyes. Later, he's shot directly, no mirror, no distortion. That's selfhood. Doorways, like I said, are huge too. If Sayan is always standing at edges, always half-invited, then the expulsion scene becomes the ultimate doorway moment. And the public reveal becomes a new threshold, stepping into a version of himself that doesn't need permission. Also, color. If Sayan's world early on is muted, washed, controlled, then the moment he removes protection can sharpen the palette. Not necessarily brighter, just clearer. Less hedge. That clarity would match the thematic clarity of truth. Sound motive idea. A recurring quiet sound that becomes unbearable. Maybe it's a phone vibration. Maybe it's a door chime. Maybe it's the clink of a spoon at dinner. If the show repeats it during humiliations, then later, when the family is panicking, you can bring that sound back and let it mean something different. That's the kind of detail that makes a drama feel crafted, not just plotted. Now, let's talk about the relationship between promise and protection, because they're tied. The promise is why he stayed. The protection is what he gave while staying. When he's expelled, he's not just losing a marriage, he's losing the context in which his promise made sense. So removing protection is also a statement. The promise is no longer binding because the relationship has been severed. The wife kicking him out is basically the moment she forfeits the benefits of his loyalty. And that's a concept that hits hard if you've ever been in a dynamic where you kept giving because you felt obligated. And then the moment you stopped, you were treated like you were the problem. This drama is about flipping that script. It's about saying, no, the obligation was never one-sided. You just acted like it was. Here's a self-aware aside. I swear, every drama family that disrespects the helpful in-law behaves like the laws of gratitude don't apply to them. Like they're living in a different universe where kindness is a natural resource you can extract forever with zero consequences. And then the mind shuts down and they're like, why would you do this to us? Babe, you did it to yourself. Anyway, I want to zoom in on the phrase, Mengung kap kebenaran di hadpan public. It's not he takes revenge. It's he reveals truth. That word choice matters. Truth suggests facts, receipts, reality. It suggests that the family's power was built on deception or misperception. And that's more interesting than a simple power flex because it makes the family's downfall feel earned. They weren't just unlucky. They were living in a lie. And a truth reveal has a different emotional temperature than revenge. Revenge is hot. Truth is cold. Truth is bright light. Truth is the sound of a chair scraping back when someone realizes they can't sit comfortably anymore. If the show leans into truth as an act of clarity rather than vengeance as an act of emotion, it'll stand out in a crowded genre. Now, possible structural weakness, the regret too late outcome can sometimes make the ex-wife's family feel one-dimensional because they exist to be taught a lesson. To avoid that, the show needs to give them internal logic. Even if we hate them, we should understand how they justify themselves. Maybe they think they're protecting their daughter's status. Maybe they think Sayan is beneath them. Maybe they believe promises are for fools. Their worldview needs to be consistent. Because consistent villains are scarier than random villains. Random villains are just noise. Also, the family unit should have internal fractures. Even if the premise doesn't specify, the most believable families aren't all aligned. Someone is complicit but quiet. Someone is loud and cruel. Someone benefits but pretends to be moral. Someone may be even like Sayan but lacks courage. Those variations make the household dynamic feel real and allow the drama to play with complicity as a theme. Complicity is the silent villain in stories like this. It's easy to hate the person who says the insult. It's harder, and more important, to confront the people who hear it and do nothing. Here's another rehook. The most devastating moment might not be when Sayan reveals the truth, but when someone in that family realizes they always knew, on some level, and still chose to look away. That's the kind of regret you can't apologize out of. Now, let's shift to the emotional pacing after the expulsion. A lot of dramas treat expulsion as liberation. Like, good, now you can be powerful. But expulsion is also a loss. It's also destabilizing. If you've built your routine around endurance, yes, even toxic routine, being removed from it can feel like freefall. The show should let Sayan have that freefall moment, even briefly. It makes his later clarity more satisfying. This is where a quiet scene can be gold. Sayan alone with his bag. No dramatic music. Just him sitting somewhere ordinary, looking at his phone. Maybe he scrolls old messages. Maybe he deletes something. Maybe he doesn't do anything at all. The stillness would communicate he's not a machine. He's a person who just lost his life. If the drama rushes past that into instant dominance, it loses emotional credibility. And if the show is really thoughtful, it can show that Sayan's protection wasn't just external. He might have been protecting the family from the truth of who they are. Sometimes, when you're the scapegoat, you absorb the family's ugliness so they can feel good about themselves. You become the problem so they don't have to examine their own behavior. When Sayan leaves, that scapegoat disappears, and their ugliness has nowhere to go but inward. They start turning on each other. They start blaming each other. The house becomes tense. That's delicious drama. And it's psychologically spot on. Now, The title again, Mantan Suami Sang Juru Selamat. It suggests Sayan's identity as the savior is central enough that even after divorce, it defines the narrative. That's fascinating because it implies his saviorhood isn't tied to being a husband. It's tied to who he is or who people think he is. And that opens up a thematic question. Is being a savior a gift or a burden? Savior complexes can be self-destructive. They can keep you in harmful situations because you believe you're responsible for saving others. The promise could be the trigger for that savior role. Maybe he promised someone he'd protect the family. Maybe he promised himself. Whatever it is, the show can explore how that identity traps him. And then, when he becomes the ex-husband, it forces him to redefine himself without the savior role being rewarded or even acknowledged. That's a meaningful arc. Learning to stop saving people who don't want to be better. That's not revenge. That's growth. Now I want to touch on the wife's expulsion choice again, but from a different angle. If she's the one who kicks him out, she's not just choosing her family over him. She's choosing a version of reality where Sayan is less. Because if she admitted he mattered, if she admitted he was protecting them, if she admitted he deserved respect, then she'd have to confront the fact that she let him be mistreated. That's guilt. And many people will do anything to avoid guilt, including doubling down on cruelty. So her expulsion could be a defense mechanism, a way to erase the cognitive dissonance. If he's gone, I don't have to face what I allowed. That's dark. That's human. And if the show taps into that, her character becomes more than a villain. She becomes a portrait of cowardice. Cowardice is a much more interesting antagonist trait than evil. And it would make the later regret even more potent because regret is essentially guilt that finally breaks through the defenses. Let's talk about regret being too late. Too late for what? That's the sting. Too late to fix the marriage. Too late to preserve their social comfort. Too late to keep Sayan in his role. Too late to undo public exposure. But emotionally, the biggest too late is often too late to go back to the version of yourself who hadn't done the harm yet. Once you cross certain lines, you can't uncross them. You can apologize, sure, but the relationship is changed. The trust is changed. Your self-image is changed. That's the tragedy of too late. If the show respects that tragedy, it won't let apology be a magic reset. It will let consequences remain. Now, as a reviewer, I want to talk about what makes this kind of drama satisfying without becoming cynical. The show has to balance catharsis with humanity. If it's all catharsis, it becomes shallow. If it's all humanity, it might become frustrating because viewers came for payoff. The sweet spot is giving viewers the payoff while also letting the payoff feel complicated. So maybe Sayan's public truth reveal is satisfying, but it also costs him something. Maybe he loses privacy. Maybe he's misunderstood by some people. Maybe he realizes he hates being in the spotlight. The premise doesn't specify, so I'm not claiming those plot points. I'm saying the emotional logic is richer if truth has consequences beyond the bad people regret. Because truth is messy, and public truth is messier. Here's a rehook that I think is crucial. If Sayan has been protecting them, what does it say about him that he had that power in the first place? And why did he choose to use it quietly for 3 years? That question is where the drama can depend. Because it implies Sayan has agency and capability from the beginning. He wasn't powerless, he was restrained. That's a different kind of character. It means he made an active choice to endure, not because he couldn't fight back, but because he wouldn't. That's fascinating. It suggests a moral code. And then the expulsion breaks the code's context. The drama can show that code breaking. It can show him debating with himself. It can show him hesitating before revealing the truth publicly. Because once you expose someone, you can't unexpose them. Once you pull back protection, you can't pretend you didn't. And if he does it anyway, you understand it's not impulsive. It's a line crossed after years of restraint. Now, about the audience experience, this is a drama that wants you to feel rage on Sayan's behalf. It wants you to feel that slow burn anger. But it also wants to tempt you with the revenge high. The question is whether it then asks you to sober up after. Whether it says, okay, you got your hit. Now what? Some shows never ask the now what, and they end up feeling disposable. Fun, but forgettable. The shows that linger in your mind are the ones that let you feel the hangover of catharsis, the emptiness after revenge, the quiet after the storm. Because after you blow up your oppressor's narrative, you still have to wake up the next day and live with yourself. I want to highlight something subtle about Sayan's role as Menantu. In-law dynamics are inherently political. You're always negotiating belonging. And in many cultures, being an in-law comes with expectations of service, humility, and deference. If Sayan is being looked down on, it could reflect a broader cultural critique. How families use tradition as an excuse to demand submission. The show can explore that without being preachy. It can show how respect is demanded downward but rarely given upward. It can show how elders or higher status family members weaponize family values to enforce hierarchy. And then Sayan's truth reveal becomes a counter-value. Real family should include dignity. And yes, I know, I'm getting thematic. But this premise invites it. It's literally built on social hierarchy. Now, I also want to note something about the term Juru Selamat, savior. Savior stories can be dangerously ego-driven. A savior can become someone who believes they are above consequences too. So the drama has a chance to explore whether Sayan's saviorhood is pure or whether it's also pride. Does he protect them because he wants to be indispensable? Because if so, then the family's disrespect hits him not only as cruelty but as insult to his ego. That would make his arc more nuanced. And it would make the public truth reveal more emotionally layered. Is he revealing truth because it's right, or because he's tired of being unrecognized? Again, both can be true. Humans are rarely pure. This is where a good script gives Sayan moments that aren't flattering. Not making him a villain, but making him real. Maybe he has a petty thought. Maybe he hesitates because part of him still wants reconciliation. Maybe he feels satisfaction and hates himself for it. Those contradictions are what make a character memorable. And as someone who reviews dramas for a living, I'm begging writers, let your heroes be complicated. We can handle it. We actually prefer it. Okay, let's get into the idea of public exposure as a form of justice again, because I don't want to let the show off the hook. There's a fine line between accountability and spectacle. If Sayan reveals truth publicly, the drama needs to be careful not to celebrate mob behavior or dehumanization. The family deserves consequences, but they're still human. If the show turns them into punching bags for the crowd, it risks becoming the same kind of cruelty it's condemning. But if it frames the public truth as restoring reality, correcting lies, removing false prestige, then it can feel like accountability rather than bullying. The difference is tone. The difference is whether Sayan is inviting the public to hate them or simply refusing to lie for them anymore. Refusing to lie is such a powerful moral stance, and it doesn't require cruelty. A quiet line like, "I won't cover for you anymore," can be more devastating than any insult. Now, I want to imagine the kind of regret scene that would actually satisfy me as a viewer without being melodramatic. Not a big apology. Instead, the family tries to perform normalcy. They host a dinner, maybe. They try to act like everything is fine. But the atmosphere is poisoned. The jokes don't land. The food tastes like nothing. The person who used to keep things smooth, Sayan, isn't there. And you can feel the absence like a missing wall in the house. Someone says his name and everyone freezes for half a second. That half second is the regret. Not tears. Not screaming. Just a pause that says, "We broke something and we can't fix it." That would hit harder than any groveling. And the wife, if she's written well, would have her own private pause. A moment where she looks at something ordinary, like a chair he used to sit in, and it suddenly feels like a monument to her choices. That kind of regret is haunting. Now, There's also room for the drama to explore how regret can be selfish. The family might regret losing protection because now they're vulnerable. They might regret because their public image is damaged. They might regret because their comfort is disrupted. Those are not noble regrets, but they are realistic. And watching someone experience selfish regret is still satisfying because it's consequence. Moral awakening is not required for consequence to be enjoyable. Sometimes you just want to see the universe stop rewarding bad behavior. But I do want the show to give at least one character a real moment of recognition. Not because I need redemption arcs, but because recognition is emotionally powerful. When someone who once dismissed you finally sees you clearly, even if it's too late, it validates the audience's emotional investment. It says, yes, what you saw was real. Yes, the disrespect was wrong. Even if Cyan doesn't need that recognition anymore, the audience might. And that's okay. Here's another rehook. What if the person who regrets most isn't the loudest cruel family member, but the quiet complicit one who did nothing? Because that's the person who has to live with the knowledge that they could have stopped it and chose comfort instead. Quiet complicity is a heavy burden once you stop lying to yourself. Now, let's talk about the show's potential emotional manipulation. These dramas love to weaponize pity. They make the hero suffer, so you'll cheer when the villains fall. That's fine, it's a drama. But overdoing suffering can become voyeuristic. If the 3-year humiliation is depicted too relentlessly, it can feel like the show is enjoying Cyan's pain. That's when I start to pull away as a viewer. So I'm hoping the show balances humiliation scenes with moments of Cyan's inner life. Moments where he's not just being harmed, but thinking, planning, remembering, resisting internally. Give him dignity even while he's being disrespected. Otherwise it becomes misery porn. And one way to do that is to show that Cyan's endurance isn't passive. Even if he doesn't fight back publicly, he might have private rituals of strength. He might write. He might work. He might practice patience intentionally. He might have a boundary he refuses to cross even when he's mistreated, like he won't insult back, because that would make him like them. That's dignity. And then, when he finally reveals the truth, it's not because he snapped. It's because he chose to stop carrying their burden. That choice is more powerful than snapping. Okay, a bit about dialogue. If the script is smart, it won't give Cyan long monologues early on. It'll give him short, restrained lines. Polite lines. And the politeness will become a weapon later. When someone is calm while everyone else is scrambling, it makes them look in control. Also, the family's insults should be realistic, not cartoonish. The most painful insults are often framed as advice, jokes, concern. We just want what's best for her. You know how you are. Don't be sensitive. Those phrases are knives because they deny the wound while making it. And when Cyan reveals truth publicly, his language should also be clean, not flowery. Truth doesn't need poetry. It needs precision. Precision feels like power. Now, I want to reflect on why this premise is so popular right now. In a lot of modern storytelling, audiences are tired of watching people be mistreated with no payoff. They want accountability. They want consequences. They want the fantasy that the world eventually recognizes value and punishes arrogance. It's not just entertainment. It's emotional compensation for real life, where consequences are often uneven. So Mantan Suami sung Juru Selamat is tapping into that hunger. It's basically saying, yes, the person you dismissed might be the one keeping you afloat. And audiences love that because it reverses a common real-life injustice, undervaluation of quiet labor. This is especially relevant in relationships. The person doing the invisible maintenance is often treated as replaceable. The drama says, try replacing them. See what happens. That's why it hits. But again, execution matters. If the drama's idea of truth is just actually he's rich, powerful, it risks reinforcing the same status logic the family used. Like, he deserved respect because he had power. That's not a great message. The better message is, he deserved respect because he was human. The power reveal is just what forces shallow people to acknowledge that humanity. So I'm watching for whether the show critiques status worship or accidentally endorses it. And here's the contrarian angle again. It can still be satisfying even if the family only regrets because of power. That can actually be the point. It reveals their moral emptiness. But the show needs to frame it as emptiness, not as, see, they learned. If it frames selfish regret as growth, that's when it gets morally sloppy. Now, Science's public reveal potentially puts him in a new role. Not the savior behind the scenes, but the truth teller in the open. That's a huge identity shift. And identity shifts are stressful. If the show shows him struggling with it, disliking attention, missing privacy, feeling exposed, then it becomes richer. A hero who is powerful but uncomfortable is compelling. A hero who is powerful and smug is fine but less interesting. Also, we can't forget the emotional core. This is a breakup story, an ex-husband story. Divorce, even when justified, comes with grief. If the show treats the marriage as disposable, it loses emotional weight. It needs to show that Cyan didn't just lose a house, he lost a future he thought he was building. Even if that future was built on illusions, losing it still hurts. And if the wife shows regret, her regret is also grief. She might grieve the man she lost. She might grieve the version of herself who could have chosen better. She might grieve the comfort she prioritized. Grief can coexist with guilt. Again, messy. Here's another rehook. What if Cyan's biggest victory isn't making them regret, but breaking the promise in the healthiest way by realizing he doesn't owe anyone his life? Because promises can become chains. And learning to release a promise, especially one tied to guilt, is a profound form of freedom. Now, I'm going to dig into what promise could symbolically represent without inventing plot facts. It can represent duty. It can represent debt. It can represent trauma. Sometimes people make promises in crisis, and then they live inside those promises long after the crisis is over. The promise becomes a way to control uncertainty. If I keep this vow, at least I'm a good person. It becomes a moral anchor. But anchors can also drown you. So if the drama is smart, it will show that Cyan's promise, while honorable, might have been harming him. And that his decision to stop protecting the family is also a decision to stop punishing himself. That's a powerful theme, the difference between loyalty and self-erasure. And if you've ever been a people pleaser or the fixer in a group, this will hit you hard. Fixers often attract takers. And takers will call you selfish the moment you stop fixing. Watching Cyan go through that, being expelled, then being blamed, then revealing truth, can be weirdly validating. It's like the drama is saying, you are allowed to stop. Now, I want to talk about tone management. The show needs to balance anger and tenderness. Too much anger, and it becomes exhausting. Too much tenderness, and it becomes toothless. The best episodes in a drama like this often swing. One scene where you're furious, one scene where you're sad, one scene where you're quietly satisfied, one scene where you're uncomfortable. That emotional variety keeps you hooked. And the rehooks shouldn't just be plot hooks. They should be emotional hooks. Will he leave? Will she defend him? Will he finally speak? Those questions keep viewers invested. Now, about the family's regret being too late again, there's a very specific satisfaction in too late stories. It teaches people that apologies are not time machines. In real life, we sometimes apologize expecting forgiveness as a reward. I said sorry, so you have to come back. This drama's premise suggests the family will learn that sorry doesn't restore access. Sorry doesn't undo harm. Sorry is just a word unless it's paired with change. And even then, change doesn't guarantee reconciliation. That's a mature message if the show leans into it. And if Cyan refuses reconciliation, that can be controversial for viewers who crave a neat ending. But it's often more honest. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is not return to a place that broke you, even if they finally understand. Now, I'm going to go into a possible scene pattern that can deepen the story without inventing specifics. Imagine Cyan interacting with someone outside the family after being expelled, someone neutral, someone who doesn't know the family's narrative. In that interaction, Cyan might realize how abnormal his marriage environment was. Sometimes you don't know you're being mistreated until you step outside and someone treats you normally. That can be a heartbreaking realization. Like, oh, people can be kind to me without conditions. That kind of moment is quietly revolutionary for a character like Cyan. It makes his return to dignity feel not like revenge, but like healing. And healing is a better long-term payoff than revenge. Here's another self-aware aside. I know I'm asking a lot of emotional nuance from a drama that is, at its core, you messed with the wrong in-law fantasy. But sometimes those fantasies become accidentally profound because they're rooted in real social pain. And the best writers take advantage of that. Now, let's address a production challenge. Portraying 3 years of time without making viewers feel like they watched 3 years of the same scene. Time compression requires smart visual shorthand. Changes in hair, wardrobe, season, set dressing. Repeated locations with small differences. A calendar page flip. A montage of family gatherings. Those choices make the endurance feel long without showing everything. And performance can signal time too. Early Cyan might be more expressive. Later Cyan might be more guarded. The wife might become more dismissive over time. The family might become bolder in their insults as they realize he won't fight back. Those are time markers. Also, the way Cyan responds to disrespect should evolve. If he reacts the same way every time, it's boring. If he gradually stops reacting, it's chilling. Because it signals numbness. And numbness is often the step before leaving. Now, here's a question that can keep you hooked mid-series. Does Cyan ever truly stop loving his wife? Or does he just stop choosing her? Because love and choice are different. You can love someone and still leave. You can stop choosing them because they're harmful. That distinction is emotionally rich. And if the drama explores it, it'll deepen the heartbreak. Love without trust is agony. Love without respect is humiliation. Love without protection is vulnerability. And Cyan's story is basically about those things being stripped away. If the show allows Cyan to grieve the love, it will feel more real than if he just flips into cold revenge mode. Now, let's talk about the family's dynamic after the truth reveal, again, keeping it general. Once the truth is out publicly, the family's internal hierarchy might wobble. People who are confident might become paranoid. People who are cruel might become defensive. People who are quiet might become resentful. The family might start blaming each other for letting it get this far. That internal collapse is often more satisfying than external punishment because it reveals that their unity was conditional too. They were only united when it benefited them. When pressure hits, the cracks show. And that, again, is realistic. Also, the wife might be caught between loyalty to family and guilt towards Cyan, and that tension could be intense. If she tries to repair things with Cyan, the family might resist. If she stays with family, she has to live with regret. That's a dramatic trap of her own making. And if the show gives her a moment of honest self-recognition, like she realizes she became the person she swore she wouldn't be, that could be devastating. Not because it excuses her, but because it humanized the tragedy. Here's a rehook. What if the family's regret isn't we were wrong about Cyan, but we revealed who we are? Because the truth reveal isn't just about Cyan being hidden. It's about them being exposed. Their values, their cruelty, their dependence. Exposure is painful. Now, I want to talk about audience catharsis again, but specifically about the moment Cyan removes protection. That moment can be framed in two ways, as a power flex or as a boundary. And I keep coming back to boundaries because they're emotionally healthier. If it's a boundary, the moment is quiet. It might even be invisible to the family at first. They might not realize he stopped protecting them until things start going wrong. That delayed realization is more satisfying than an immediate, "I'm cutting you off" speech, because it feels like natural consequence rather than performance. And it also aligns with the idea that Sion has been quietly managing things for years. He wouldn't suddenly become theatrical. He would simply stop. Stopping can be the loudest act of all. Now, I want to drill into the public truth again in terms of staging. A public reveal scene can be shot like a battlefield or like an autopsy. Battlefield is high emotion, quick cuts, intense music, big reactions. Autopsy is calm, steady camera, clear sound, slow realization. I'm rooting for autopsy. It would make the scene feel like accountability rather than spectacle. And if the show uses the autopsy approach, it can still be thrilling, because thrill can come from inevitability, not just from fireworks. Watching people realize they're cornered by facts is thrilling in a different way. Also, reaction shots are key. Not just the family's reaction, but Sion's. Does he flinch when he says something painful? Does he look relieved? Does he look haunted? Those reactions tell you what kind of person he is becoming. Because every revenge scene is also self-portrait. Now, I'm going to address another potential critique. Isn't this just another hidden powerful man trope? Maybe. It depends. If Sion's protection is coded as wealth or influence, it can fall into that trope. But even if it does, the emotional truth can still be valid. The trope becomes stale only when it's used as a shortcut instead of an exploration. If the show uses Sion's hidden power to explore how society treats people based on perceived status, then it's not just tropey. It's commentary. It's, look how quickly you respect someone when you think they're useful. And that's why I'm okay with the trope in principle. I just want the show to handle it with awareness. Here's another surprising take. Sometimes the most satisfying version of this story is when Sion's truth isn't about being secretly high status, but about being quietly competent, principled, and integral. Because that kind of truth is more relatable. Most people don't have secret empires, but many people are undervalued in their own homes. Seeing that undervaluation exposed is cathartic. So if the drama keeps the truth grounded, whatever it is, it will resonate more widely. Now, I want to talk about how the show might handle the emotional transition from husband to ex-husband. That's identity whiplash. One day you're part of a family system, even if you're mistreated. The next day you're out. There's a grief in losing even a toxic belonging. The drama should acknowledge that. It's not romanticizing toxicity. It's recognizing that humans get attached to roles, even painful ones. Sion might miss routines. He might miss the idea of being a husband. He might miss the hope. Hope is often the last thing to die, and when it dies, it hurts. If the show gives him a moment where he realizes he's no longer waiting for her to choose him, that moment could be quietly monumental. Like, oh, I'm done. That kind of internal click is powerful. And that click is often more important than the public reveal. Because the public reveal changes the world. The internal click changes the self. Here's a rehook. What if Sion's real truth isn't something he reveals to the public, but something he finally admits to himself? That's where character arcs live. Okay, let's pivot to the editing rhythm around the expulsion. The expulsion is likely the pivot point of the series. If it comes too early, you lose the weight of endurance. If it comes too late, you risk exhausting viewers. So the placement matters. And the show needs to make the expulsion feel like an escalation, not a random twist. The expulsion should feel like the culmination of the wife's gradual alignment with family cruelty. Like she's been choosing them in small ways for years, and now she's making it official. And the scene should be shot with intimacy, not flashy. Expulsions are personal. The camera should be close enough to catch the tremor in a hand, the micro swallow, the refusal to cry. Those details make it real. And again, the most brutal expulsions are calm. When someone kicks you out with a steady voice, it says they've already emotionally left. That's devastating. Now, I want to discuss how the show can keep viewers sympathetic to Sion even as he becomes more ruthless. Because sometimes these dramas turn the hero into a destroy everyone machine, and then you start to feel weird. You start to think, okay, they were awful, but this is becoming something else. To avoid that, the drama can show that Cyan's actions are proportional. Or it can show that he's aware of the moral cost. Even if he chooses to proceed, awareness matters. It keeps him human. A single scene where he hesitates, where he considers the fallout and still chooses truth, can keep the audience on his side without making him a saint. And if he does something morally questionable, the drama should let it feel questionable. Don't frame everything he does as automatically justified just because he suffered. Suffering doesn't grant moral immunity. That's a mature stance. And it's what would elevate this story from revenge snack to revenge with a conscience. Now, the wife's family regret too late implies they attempt to mend or manipulate. That's often what families do when they lose control. They might try to reframe the narrative. They might try to apologize. They might try to blame Cyan. They might try to pull him back in. The drama can get very tense here because this is where power games intensify. People who are dismissive can become suddenly affectionate when they need you. That fake affection is nauseating. And it's also incredibly realistic. Watching Cyan navigate that, deciding whether to engage, whether to ignore, whether to confront, can be some of the most satisfying material because it tests his boundaries. A strong boundary is not loud. It's consistent. And consistency is hard when people are pushing your guilt buttons, especially if your whole identity was built around keeping a promise. Now, let's talk about how the promise might be used against him. Families like this often weaponize morality. They might accuse him of being ungrateful, disloyal, selfish. They might invoke family values. If Cyan is a promise keeper, those accusations might sting. So the drama can create a really interesting conflict where Cyan has to redefine what loyalty means. Is loyalty staying and enduring disrespect? Or is loyalty telling the truth and refusing to enable harm? That's a powerful moral question. And it's not just drama. It's real life. Many people confuse loyalty with self-sacrifice. True loyalty can include boundaries. True loyalty can include saying no. If the drama articulates that through scenes, not speeches, it becomes quietly empowering. Here's a rehook. The family regrets too late. But does Cyan ever regret too late as well? Regret the years he gave, regret the silence, regret the promise? Because that would be heartbreaking and honest. And it would make his victory bittersweet. Bittersweet is the flavor of grown-up drama. Now, I want to talk about the potential symbolism of protection. Protection can be financial, social, legal, reputational. But symbolically, protection is also emotional shielding. Cyan might have been protecting the family from shame, from accountability, from internal collapse. He might have been the emotional shock absorber. When the shock absorber is removed, everything rattles. That's why the family regrets too late. They didn't realize he was carrying the weight until the weight hit them. This also ties into a theme of invisible labor, often performed by the least respected person in a system. It's a social critique that applies to families, workplaces, friendships. The person you take for granted is often the person making your life easier. So the drama's catharsis comes from making the invisible visible. That's why the public reveal matters. It's visibility. It's you don't get to erase me anymore. Now, let's talk about potential visual storytelling in the truth-revealed aftermath. The family's home could be shot differently, more empty, more echoey, less warm. Even if nothing physically changes, the atmosphere changes. The camera can linger on empty chairs, untouched plates, closed doors. Those images can communicate absence and consequence without dialogue. For Cyan, his spaces could become brighter, simpler, more open. Or, if the show wants to emphasize the cost, his space could be sparse and lonely, freedom with loneliness. Both are valid. Freedom is not always cozy at first. Music can reflect that too. Freedom music doesn't have to be triumphant. It can be quiet, a single motif that feels like breathing. And if the drama uses silence after major confrontations, that's confidence. Silence shows the show trusts its audience to feel without being told what to feel. Now, I want to address the audience's emotional alignment. This drama wants you aligned with Cyan, but it can also invite you to reflect on your own behavior. Have you ever been part of a group that dismissed someone? Have you ever laughed at a joke that was actually cruel? Have you ever stayed silent to keep peace? The best dramas don't just make you cheer, they make you squirm a little. They make you wonder if you've been on the wrong side of a power imbalance. And that's where this story has potential depth. It's not just bad family gets punished. It's how do people become bad families? It's how does social hierarchy rot empathy? Okay, another self-aware aside, I know some of you just want me to say whether it's bingeable. We'll get there. But I need to talk about the emotional mechanics because that's what determines bingeability. A drama like this is bingeable when each episode ends with a boundary being tested. Not necessarily a cliffhanger, but an emotional pivot. A new layer of truth. A new crack in the family's facade. If the drama keeps that rhythm, you'll keep hitting next because you want to see the next crack. Now, let's talk about the wife's expulsion again, but from the lens of public versus private. When she kicks him out privately, she controls the narrative internally. She can tell the family, he's the problem. She can tell herself, this is necessary. But when Cyan reveals truth publicly, he takes narrative control away from her. That's why it's so destabilizing. It's not just exposure, it's loss of story ownership. People who care about status care about stories. They care about how things look. So public truth is the ultimate threat. And that's why the regret hits too late. Because once the story is public, you can't hide it again. You can't put toothpaste back in the tube. You can't unring the bell. You can't reframe it as easily. The family might try. Sure, they might spin. But the existence of truth in public space is a stain on their control. Now, I want to think about how the show might portray Cyan's emotional state right before he reveals truth. This is a moment of decision. The best version is not impulsive. It's considered. He might look at his phone, look at a door, look at the sky. Small visual cues of someone weighing their life. The show can use a slow close-up of his eyes, not tearful, but heavy. Like someone who has been carrying a secret and is finally going to set it down. That's powerful. And it doesn't require plot specifics. Now, I'm going to address a possible complaint. This is predictable. Yes, the premise tells you where it's going. But predictability is not automatically bad. In fact, in catharsis dramas, predictability can be part of the pleasure. You know the tables will turn. You're watching for how, not if. You're watching for execution, performance, and emotional texture. It's like listening to a song you know will hit the chorus. The joy is the build and the delivery. So I'm not judging this drama on originality of premise. I'm judging it on the quality of suffering portrayal, the credibility of consequences, and the emotional truth of the characters. And based on the premise alone, it has the ingredients. The question is whether it cooks them well. Here's a rehook. The story promises the family regrets too late. But does the drama allow Cyan to be satisfied? Or does it reveal that satisfaction doesn't heal what happened? Because that's where the story can either stay fun or become profound. Now, I want to talk about how a drama like this can accidentally undermine itself. If the family's regret is too extreme, it becomes comedic. If they go from arrogant to pathetic in one scene, it feels fake. Regret is usually gradual. It's denial, then irritation, then panic, then bargaining, then humiliation, then maybe recognition. Those stages are emotionally believable. So the show should pace the regret like a descent, not a cliff drop. Also, the public truth reveal shouldn't solve everything instantly. If it does, the drama becomes simplistic. Truth creates new problems too. It creates backlash. It creates gossip. It creates consequences for Sayan as well. Even if the family is harmed, Sayan might be criticized for exposing them. People love to judge the person who speaks up more than the person who caused harm. That's unfortunately realistic. If the drama touches on that, it gets more grounded. It stops being pure fantasy and starts being social commentary. Now, since we're on Flick Flair, I'll say it bluntly. I'm allergic to dramas that treat the hero as morally perfect. And I'm also allergic to dramas that excuse cruelty because family. Family is not a free pass. If the show tries to soften the family's behavior by saying they're just like that, I'll side-eye it. But if the show says they're just like that and then punishes them for being like that, I'm listening. Because just like that is not an excuse, it's an indictment. Now, I want to reflect on my own emotional reaction again, because this is a show that pokes personal nerves. Watching a person endure disrespect for years reminds me of times I stayed too long in situations because I thought being patient would change people. It didn't. People didn't change because I was patient. They changed only when they wanted to, or when consequences forced them to. So watching Sayan finally withdraw protection feels like a fantasy of self-respect. It's the moment you wish you had, the moment where you stop explaining your worth. And I think that's why these stories resonate. They give you a clean boundary moment that real life rarely provides. Real life boundaries are messy. People argue. People twist your words. People call you cruel for leaving. This drama gives you the fantasy that the truth will be recognized and the wrongdoers will regret. It's comforting. But again, the show can do both. It can provide comfort and still acknowledge mess. That's the best outcome. Now, I want to talk about the possibility of the drama exploring masculinity differently. A male character enduring humiliation in a family context is interesting because it flips some common tropes. Often, men in dramas are portrayed as dominant or socially protected. Here, Sayan is socially vulnerable. He's in a feminized position in the family hierarchy, expected to be humble, to endure, to keep peace. That can be a subtle critique of how power works beyond gender. It's about status within a family structure. If the show handles that thoughtfully, it can broaden empathy. It can show that humiliation and social vulnerability are not gendered experiences, they're human experiences shaped by hierarchy. And it can also show a different kind of strength, not physical dominance, but moral endurance, emotional restraint, and ultimately self-respect. That's compelling. Here's another rehook. When Sayan reveals the truth publicly, is he reclaiming masculinity in a traditional sense, dominance, control, or is he redefining strength as honesty and boundaries? Because that difference matters. Now, as we move into the later portion of the story arc implied by the premise, we're essentially in consequence territory. The family regrets too late. That suggests they try to undo what can't be undone. It suggests Sayan's removal of protection has real impact. And this is where the drama's writing has to resist the urge to be lazy. Lazy consequence writing is when everything bad happens to the villains conveniently, like karma is a script assistant. Good consequence writing is when consequences emerge logically from the family's own behavior. Their arrogance leads them to underestimate. Their cruelty leads them to lose support. Their dependence leads them to panic when support disappears. Their obsession with status leads them to crumble when status is threatened. That's satisfying because it feels earned. It feels like the family built their own trap. And Sayan simply stopped holding the door open. Now, I want to emphasize, Sayan removing protection is not him attacking. It's him withdrawing. That's an important conceptual difference. Withdrawing is a boundary. Attacking is revenge. Both can exist, but withdrawing is morally cleaner, and it fits the truth theme. If the drama frames his actions as "I'm done covering," that's stronger than "I'm going to destroy you." Destroying is dramatic. Refusing to cover is principled. And principled is sexy in a drama way. Sorry, it is. Now, I want to imagine the kind of scene where the family's regret becomes too late in a way that actually stings. It's not them crying, it's them asking. They ask Sayan to help, and he says no, not angrily, not cruelly, just no. And they don't know what to do with a calm no. They're used to manipulating with emotion, with status, with guilt. A calm no is a wall. That scene could be shot with minimal movement. The camera stays steady. The family member leans forward, pleading or bargaining, and Sayan stays still. Stillness is dominance. Not aggressive dominance, but groundedness. The grounded person sets the emotional weather, and the family member starts to unravel because they can't make him move anymore. That's consequence. And it's delicious. Here's another rehook. What if the family's regret is actually anger? Anger that Sayan won't keep saving them? Because people often get angry when you stop doing what they feel entitled to. That anger reveals entitlement more clearly than any insult. Now, I'm going to talk about how the show can keep Sayan sympathetic even as he becomes more distant. Distance can be mistaken for coldness. The show needs to show that his distance is self-protection, not cruelty. It can do that with small moments where you see his softness in private. Maybe he exhales. Maybe he looks at something and smiles sadly. Maybe he hesitates before blocking a number. Maybe he doesn't block at all but still refuses to engage. Those moments keep him human. Because the danger in revenge dramas is turning the hero into a statue. Statues are not relatable. People are. Now, the wife's family regret too late also implies a lesson about timing. Respect given too late is not respect, it's reaction. Love expressed too late is not love, it's fear of loss. Apologies too late are often about relieving the apologizer, not healing the hurt person. That's a harsh truth, and it's one I hope the drama doesn't soften. If the family says sorry only when consequences hit, their sorry is suspect. And Sayan has every right not to accept it. Acceptance is not owed. Now, I'm going to push into the emotional philosophy of truth in public. Public truth has a different function than private truth. Private truth is about intimacy and repair. Public truth is about justice and narrative. Sayan choosing public truth suggests he's no longer seeking repair within the family. He's seeking justice beyond them. He's seeking to correct the story in a broader context. That's a big emotional statement. I don't believe you are capable of repairing this privately. That's what public exposure implies. It implies private communication failed or was impossible. And that's heartbreaking because it means the marriage and family system was so broken that truth needed an audience to survive. Now, if the drama wants to twist the knife, it can show that Sayan tried private truth before and was dismissed. Again, I'm not inventing plot events, but emotionally, that's a logical layer. It would make the public reveal feel like a last resort rather than a performance. And last resorts feel morally stronger. Here's another rehook. Is Sayan's public truth reveal a moment of empowerment? Or is it a moment of surrender, surrendering the hope of a private resolution? Because surrender can look like power from the outside. But inside, it can feel like grief. Now, I want to talk about the emotional irony of being that savior who gets expelled. A savior is supposed to be valued. But many saviors are valued only for what they provide, not for who they are. When they stop providing, they are discarded. That's the tragedy of transactional relationships. This drama is essentially a cautionary tale for savior types. If you build relationships on saving, you attract people who want saving, not people who want you. So Sayan's arc could be read as learning to be loved without being useful. Or, if that's too hopeful, learning to live without seeking love from people who only love utility. Either way, it's a meaningful theme. Now, I'm going to shift slightly to the show's potential to depict public perception and shame. When a family's truth is exposed, shame dynamics kick in. People either take responsibility or lash out. Many lash out. The family might blame Sayan for airing dirty laundry. That's a classic move. It's the move of people who care more about image than ethics. If the drama includes that accusation, again, without needing plot specifics, it can sharpen its critique. It can show how people prioritize secrecy over harm repair. It can show how family honor is used to silence victims. And Sayan, refusing to be silenced, becomes a powerful statement. Now, I want to talk about audience satisfaction again, because this is a YouTube review, and I know why you're here. The satisfaction of this drama will likely come in waves, not one big payoff. The expulsion is a shock satisfaction. Like, okay, now it's on. The removal of protection is a slow satisfaction, watching consequences unfold. The public truth reveal is the big cathartic release, and the family's regret too late is the lingering aftertaste. But the real question is whether the drama can deliver something after the aftertaste. Something that says, and this is what Sayan becomes now. Because that's where a show earns rewatch value. Now, I'm going to keep this grounded in what we know. Sayan endured 3 years, expelled by wife, removes protection, reveals truth publicly, family regrets too late. Within that, the drama can choose to emphasize either external plot consequences or internal emotional consequences. A mixed emphasis would be best. Show the family crumbling externally and show Sayan healing or hardening internally. And that internal journey is where the acting will shine. It's where the director's restraint will matter. It's where music will either elevate or cheapen. If the show leans too hard into dramatic music and big speeches, it risks becoming a meme. If it uses quiet power, it can become genuinely affecting. And I'm hoping for quiet power. Here's a rehook before we go deeper into craft critique. The most important relationship in this drama might not be Sayan and his ex-wife. It might be Sayan and his own sense of worth. Because marriages can end. Family cruelty can end. But the internal voice you build from years of disrespect can linger. If the drama acknowledges that, it becomes emotionally resonant. Now, let's talk about how the show can depict Sayan's worth without relying on external status reveals. It can show his competence, his consistency, his integrity, the way he treats people who are not useful to him, the way he speaks when he doesn't need to impress. Those are the markers of worth that matter. If the drama reveals that Sayan was protecting the family out of integrity, not out of desire for praise, that makes him admirable. If he was protecting out of guilt, that makes him relatable. If he was protecting out of ego, that makes him complex. Any of those can work. But the show needs to choose and commit. Now, I want to talk about the wife's arc again because I don't want her to be an afterthought. She's the pivot. She's the one who expels him. That act is so central that the drama should treat it as a defining moment for her character too. It's her decision, her moral failure or her desperate choice. If the show gives her nothing but coldness, she becomes flat. If it gives her internal conflict, fear, pressure, cowardice, she becomes a tragic antagonist. Tragic antagonists are more compelling because you can see how they became that way. And yes, you can still hold them accountable. Tragedy is not absolution. If she regrets too late, that regret should not erase the harm. It should sit alongside it. She can be sorry and still wrong. She can be regretful and still responsible. That's adulthood. Now, I'm going to mention pacing again because it's easy for this plot to get stuck in one emotional gear. The show needs to avoid repetitive humiliation scenes by varying the type of tension. Sometimes tension is social, family dinners, gatherings. Sometimes tension is intimate, private marriage conflict. Sometimes tension is internal, Sayan alone with thoughts. Sometimes tension is public, truth reveal and its aftermath. If the drama rotates tension types, it stays fresh. Also, the promise can be teased gradually to maintain intrigue. Not by withholding forever, but by showing its emotional weight. Even without revealing details, the show can show Sayan touching something that symbolized the promise. A ring, a note, a photo, something abstract. Again, I'm not claiming specific objects exist, I'm describing a technique. Symbolic anchors can keep the promise present without exposition. Now, I want to talk about the audience's emotional investment in too late regret. Too late stories are addictive because they validate the idea that consequences come even if delayed. They also give you a safe way to experience loss without living it. Watching someone realize they lost a good person too late is painful, but it's a pain you can control. You can pause. You can fast forward. You can scream into a pillow and then go make tea. Real life doesn't let you do that. So this drama's appeal is partly emotional containment. It lets you process the fear of being undervalued, the fear of being discarded, the desire for recognition in a controlled narrative. And that's why, even if it's melodramatic, it can feel therapeutic. Now, I'm going to push into one more craft element: performance of regret. Regret is hard to act without making it cheesy. The best regret performances are restrained. They involve avoidance, micro-flinches, restless hands, forced smiles, eyes that can't settle. The actor playing a regretful family member should look like they're trying to hold a mask on with sweating fingers. That's regret. It's discomfort with yourself. If the drama goes for big sobbing apologies, it risks feeling like a shortcut. Not always. Sometimes a breakdown is earned. But in too late stories, quiet regret often hurts more because it feels irreversible. And Cyan's reaction to regret is just as important. If he reacts with rage, it becomes a fight. If he reacts with calm, it becomes a wall. If he reacts with sadness, it becomes tragedy. Each choice shapes the tone of the drama's final stretch. Now, I'm going to pause and ask the question that, for me, defines whether a revenge drama is meaningful. Does Cyan remain kind? Not nice. Nice is performative. Kind is a value. Kindness after suffering is difficult. If Cyan can remain kind without being weak, if he can set boundaries and still retain empathy, that's a powerful arc. If the drama shows him choosing not to become cruel, it becomes inspiring. But if the drama shows him becoming cruel, that can also be compelling if it's framed as a cost, not a win. Either way, the drama needs to know what it's saying about pain. Does pain justify cruelty, or does it challenge you to choose differently? That's the moral heart. Here's another rehook. The family regrets too late. But will the drama let the audience feel regret too? Regret for wanting revenge? Regret for enjoying the downfall? Because if it does, it's doing something interesting. Now, I'm going to talk about how the show could use parallel scenes to emphasize growth. For example, early on, a family gathering where Cyan is ignored. Later, a public setting where the family is ignored. Or early on, Cyan standing at the edge of a room. Later, the family standing at the edge while Cyan occupies center. Those parallels are satisfying because they show reversal visually without needing exposition. Also, repeated lines can be powerful. If someone in the family says a dismissive phrase early on, and later Cyan repeats it calmly back to them, not as a taunt, but as a mirror, it can be devastating. It forces them to hear themselves. Again, not inventing a specific phrase, just describing a technique. Mirrors are brutal. Now, I want to address a potential pitfall: making Cyan's public truth reveal too clean. Real truth reveals are messy. People interrupt. People deny. People deflect. People cry. People accuse. If the drama makes the scene too smooth, Cyan speaks, everyone listens, everyone accepts, it'll feel artificial. Even in melodrama, conflict should resist. Resistance makes victory satisfying. So I'm hoping the scene has friction. Denial. Attempts to silence him. Attempts to discredit him. And Cyan having to remain calm through that. That calm would be powerful. Because calm is not weakness, it's control. Now, I also want to mention that the drama can explore the idea of public as not just strangers but community. Public could include people who matter to the family, friends, colleagues, social circle. The family's shame could be intensified because the audience is not anonymous. It's their world. That makes regret sharper. And it also raises stakes for Sion because speaking publicly can burn social bridges too. He might be criticized for exposing private matters. He might be labeled as petty. He might lose social support. If the drama acknowledges that, it becomes more grounded and less wish fulfillment. Now, I'm going to dig into the psychological realism of enduring for 3 years. Endurance can be fueled by hope, fear, obligation, guilt, and identity. Sion might identify as a man who keeps promises. Breaking that identity could feel like self-betrayal. So he endures to avoid that. But when his wife expels him, she forces a different kind of self-betrayal. Staying would now mean betraying his own dignity completely. So he's trapped between two betrayals: betray the promise or betray himself. That's a strong internal conflict. And if the drama frames his turning point as choosing himself for the first time, it becomes emotionally satisfying. Because the most powerful act is self-respect. Here's another rehook. What if the promise was never meant to be kept for 3 years? What if it was meant to be kept until he learned the lesson he needed? That would make the promise feel like a narrative device for growth rather than a chain for suffering. Now, I'm going to talk about the show's potential to handle moral ambiguity. Moral ambiguity is when you can understand someone's reasons without agreeing with their actions. If the wife is pressured by family, you can understand her fear. You still judge her choices. If the family is obsessed with status, you can understand their insecurity. You still condemn their cruelty. If Sion reveals truth publicly and causes collateral damage, you can understand his decision. You still feel uneasy. That ambiguity makes drama richer. If the show avoids ambiguity and makes everyone either saint or demon, it becomes simpler, still watchable, but less memorable. Now, I'm going to address a likely viewer desire: closure. People want closure. They want the family to understand. They want Sion to be acknowledged. They want apologies. They want justice. But closure in too late stories is often partial. That's the point. Too late means you don't get the neat repair. You get the lesson. You get the consequence. You get the ache. If the drama respects that, it might frustrate some viewers who want neatness. But it will satisfy viewers who appreciate emotional honesty. And personally, I'm in the second camp. I'd rather feel a real ache than a fake bow. Now, let's talk about how the show can avoid dragging in the later stretch. After the big public truth reveal, some dramas flounder because they've delivered the payoff and don't know what to do. But this premise includes family regrets too late, which suggests there's a post-reveal descent. That descent can be compelling if it focuses on the family's attempts to regain control and Sion's refusal. Also, the drama can shift into a quieter, more reflective tone after the big reveal, exploring Sion's aftermath. That tonal shift can keep it from feeling like it's just repeating itself. But the writing needs to be disciplined. No endless scenes of the family crying and saying sorry. No endless scenes of Sion being praised. Praise scenes are boring. Conflict is interesting. Internal conflict is even more interesting. So the drama should keep asking, what does Sion want now? What does he fear? What does he regret? What does he hope? Those questions sustain narrative after the revenge moment. Here's another rehook. The family regrets too late. But does Sion ever forgive? Not for them, but for himself? Because self-forgiveness is often the last step after leaving a toxic situation. You blame yourself for staying. You feel foolish. You feel ashamed. Forgiving yourself is hard. If the drama touches that, it becomes quietly healing. Now, I want to talk about the emotional symbolism of being expelled. Expulsion is rejection. It's being told you don't belong. And belonging is one of the deepest human needs. So expulsion is not just plot. It's primal. It triggers shame. It triggers fear. It triggers anger. Sion's response to expulsion will define his character. Does he collapse? Does he harden? Does he become calm? Does he grieve? The best response is layered. A moment of shock, then a moment of composure, then later the breakdown in private. That's realistic. People often hold it together in the moment and fall apart later. If the actor can play that delayed emotional collapse, it'll be a highlight. A single tearless stare in public, then a shaky breath in private. That's acting. Now, let's talk about the audience's relationship with the wife character. In many dramas, the spouse who betrays the hero becomes the most hated character. And that can be intense. But hatred can flatten your viewing experience. If you hate her too simply, you stop paying attention to nuance. So I'm hoping the show complicates her just enough to keep you emotionally engaged rather than purely reactive. Even a small moment, her hesitating before expelling him, her discomfort after, her private guilt, can add depth. Not to excuse, but to enrich. Because the most painful betrayals are committed by people who are not monsters. They're committed by ordinary people who choose cowardice. That's why betrayal is scary. It's common. Here's another rehook. What if the wife's expulsion of Cyan isn't just betrayal? It's also her trying to expel her own guilt? Because that's a psychologically plausible move. If she pushes him out, she can pretend he was the problem. It's denial as action. Now, I'm going to move into the last big thing I want to explore before we eventually get to a final verdict later. What this drama is saying about public truth versus private dignity. Public truth can restore reputation. It can deliver justice. But private dignity is what sustains you. If Cyan's dignity depends on public validation, he's still trapped in the family's value system. He's still playing the status game. He's just winning now. But if Cyan's dignity comes from internal clarity, knowing he did his best, knowing he kept his promise as long as it was ethical, knowing he walked away when it became self-destruction, then the public truth reveal is just a tool, not his identity. That distinction matters. It's the difference between a character who evolves and a character who just changes teams in the same game. And I'm rooting for evolution. Now, I'm going to keep going into more scene-level analysis and thematic layering. And I'm not wrapping anything up yet, because there's still so much to unpack in how the story can execute the power shift, the regret, and the cost of truth, especially in the way the drama might stage the family's late realization in small humiliations that mirror what they did to Cyan, like being talked over, dismissed, left waiting, treated as an inconvenience. Not because the universe is getting back at them in a cartoon way, but because once Cyan stops cushioning them, they fall into the same kind of social coldness they once inflicted. And the irony is that they won't recognize it as justice at first. They'll recognize it as unfairness, which tells you everything about how entitled they were all along. And watching that entitlement crack is the kind of slow-burn satisfaction this premise is built for.